Hey, I'm Adam.
And I'm Brian.
Of Everyone Has a Podcast, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 124, Aliens Movie Review. Chris McBrien along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. If you'd like to reach us on Twitter, you'll find Derek at Amaron_DM, and I will be at C McBrien, and popgoesyourworld.com is our website for all of our contact information. Derek Myers, what is new in the world of pop culture for you?
Hey, Chris. Been a couple of weeks since we've had a chance to record, and in that time, I have taken in a lot of movies and watched a lot of television.
As you are wont to do, my friend, yes.
Of course. And we've got the Oscars coming up this weekend, as a matter of fact. So, you know, I've been making a point of trying to get through some of the Oscar movies I haven't seen yet. So I've taken in a lot of pop culture, a lot of media, but that's not the focus of our show today. So I'll only touch base on a few of the really great ones that I watched because, you know, I want to recommend stuff for you to watch and for our listeners to watch if they haven't seen it already.
Sure.
So I got a documentary and I got a real movie. Not that documentaries aren't real movies. We'll start with the documentary. So the documentary is called American Factory. Okay. It is on Netflix right now. It's a Netflix production. It is more than likely going to win the Oscar this weekend for Best Documentary Feature. It is the heavy favorite. At the end of the calendar year, President Obama tweeted out a list of his favorite movies and TV shows from the past year. There was like about 20 or 21 items on the list. This was one of the ones on his list. And in all full disclosure, I think his production company actually was one of the groups that funded this. So a little bit of self-interest in that one. But it's fantastic. The idea in a nutshell is in the mid-2000s in Dayton, Ohio, I think it was GM plant closed down because of the economic downturn. Everyone in the plant was laid off. The plant was shut down, and the town lost a lot of jobs. A couple years later, a Chinese investor comes in and says, I'm going to buy the factory. I'm going to change it a little bit so that it's making automotive glass, like windshields, not full cars, just the glass products for automotives. And he brings in half the staff from China because he's already got factories in China that do this. And he hires half of the rest of the employees from Dayton. Half the people who had lost jobs previously, come on back to this factory, we'll give you new jobs. But these people were making like $30, $40 an hour in the GM plant as part of the union, and now they're making like $10 an hour, no union, under the new boss. And so there's a lot of disparity and a lot of ill will, if you will. Like people are glad they got a job, but they're kind of bitter that they have to work twice as hard and make a third as much. And there's a lot of cultural differences. There's obviously a language barrier. So it's just this really interesting look. I think the documentary takes place over like 5 or 6 years, and it follows a number of the employees through their careers. Some of them quit, some get laid off, some do very well, and it's different levels of management right down to the guy who sweeps up the glass particles off the floor. It's really, really good, and it's a very timely movie to just see like it's an accurate representation of like, you know, the global economy and where our economy is here in North America. So American Factory, fantastic doc. I highly recommend it. The other one is a foreign film. It's called Parasite. It's nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars this weekend. It's nominated for a bunch of other stuff. The director's nominated, Best Screenplay.
I've heard it's very good.
It is fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, if for some reason I was under the impression that Parasite was a horror movie, and so I didn't really want to see it. And then after it got nominated for all these awards, I thought, you know what, I better go and see it. Now, it is a South Korean film, so the dialogue is all in Korean. It's English subtitles, which I know will put some people off, but you gotta look past that. It is fantastic. It is arguably one of the best movies I saw this year. It's probably not going to win the Oscar. I think 1917 is going to take it, but if 1917 doesn't win, I think Parasite is probably the number 2 movie to step in there and potentially take that Best Picture nod. I don't really want to say a lot about it because I don't want to spoil it, but it is not a horror movie. It is fantastic. I strongly recommend people take a look at it, and we'll see how it does at the Oscars this weekend.
Very good. You and I always put together an Oscar ballot. We're going to do that again this time?
Yeah, for sure.
We'll have a little
rights,
contest.
course, right?
For bragging rights. We always do that. I think you're going to be proud of me. I hope. So as you know, I only like watching old stuff, and I watch the same things over and over again. That's what I do. That's the whole point of this podcast. But I've actually discovered something new. You're so proud of me. And I've been watching it. So on Netflix, it's a Canadian show too, so you should be doubly proud. I started watching this show called Kim's Convenience. It's a new show, and it's on Netflix, and I absolutely love it. Derek, I'm actually watching something new. Are you proud?
Well, I am very proud for a couple of reasons.
Okay.
So Kim's Convenience, the lead of Kim's Convenience is actually a good friend of mine. Paul Sun-Hyung Lee is the actor who plays Appa. He's the dad. So the premise of Kim's Convenience is, as the title would indicate, it's a Korean Canadian family who owns the convenience store, and you've first generation immigrants, and so you've got kids that were born and raised in Canada with parents that were born and raised in Korea, and it's a good slice of life comedy. It's teaches you, it's one of these ones that teaches you a lesson every episode, makes you feel good. There's a lot of hilarious hijinks, and the cast is outstanding. And my friend Paul, who's the lead, is doing very well. He's a tremendous actor. Kim's Convenience was actually a play before it was a TV show, and he was Appa in the long-standing run of the play. So yeah, he's really good. I mean, the whole cast is good.
That's so cool. Like, we know famous people. Like, because another thing happened to me with remember a couple of weeks ago on one of our episodes, I mentioned that I don't really like the Tragically Hip. I know it's a Canadian thing.
Boo,
I know, whatever. I'm just being honest.
Canadian part, boo.
I know. I'm the guy that doesn't like anything, right? So then all of a sudden I mentioned that on the podcast, and Kurt Kalin reached out to me, and he is the lead guitar player for the Tragically Hip cover band, The 100th Meridian, out west. They're like this big cover band out there, right? Like, they're really well known. And so anyway, he reached out to me, and he's like, hey man, I'm going to send you a t-shirt of our band, 100th Meridian. So he sent me a t-shirt of the band, and I took a picture of myself at the hockey game, where that's such a Canadian thing. I was drinking like Tim Hortons coffee at a hockey game wearing a Tragically Hip shirt, and I put it up on their social media page. And so it's so funny, like, we both know all these famous people. Like, it's Canada. I guess everybody knows everybody up here, right?
Of course.
That's just the way it is.
Well, it's funny you mention that, because I also got a shout out from Kurt, and he's going to send me a t-shirt too, because he doesn't want me to feel left out.
Oh, that's so
when that arrives, I will do what you did, put it on, take a picture somewhere iconically Canadian,
nice.
and post it so that everyone can see that at least one of us likes the hip and can appreciate a band that does cover tunes of the Tragically Hip.
All of us Canadians, we might not all like the Tragically Hip, but we all like hockey, and we all know each other. So there's that. All right, let's hit it. Why didn't anyone tell me my was so big?
Joke after joke after joke after joke.
We ain't foul.
I bet she gives great helmet.
Never watch that part again.
This is dumb. How many
we got on this ship anyhow?
Not nearly as bad as, say, something like Revenge of the Nerds.
Evil will always triumph over good, because good is dumb.
I don't think it's something I would want to watch over and over again.
They don't make movies like this anymore. They just don't. Okay, so this week it was over to you. It was your turn to actually, no, it wasn't.
I called in my special favor at the end of the last episode, and after reviewing Alien, the Ridley Scott classic, I suggested
it was supposed to be my pick, and
yes,
but you stepped in. That's right.
I did indeed, because you like my movie. We knew that it was like a full moon, and weird
I never
things
like your movies.
were happening. Strange things were afoot at the Circle K, and so we decided. I enjoyed.
So just to set up, I enjoyed that you recommended Alien from 1979, and I loved it. It was one of the best movies, if not the best movie, that has ever been nominated on this pod that I had not seen. I just thought it was fantastic. So instead of me nominating a movie, you decided that you would say, hey, I want you to watch the sequel, Aliens.
Yeah, let's ride that gravy train all the way through. If Chris likes one, let's get him to like two. So I firmly believe that Aliens, the second movie in this film franchise, is every bit as good as the first one, and arguably better than the first one. And I'm not alone in that. If you look up a list online and you say, show me a sequel that's better than the original, it's a very short list, and there's very little room for debate on these. And you get, usually the lists is something like Empire Strikes Back, Terminator 2, Godfather 2, Aliens. That's usually the list. And then sometimes people will say, well, you can't count Godfather, you can't count Empire, because those are parts of trilogies, and that's part, the middle second act of a third act story. Again, that might be debatable, but Aliens is a standalone movie that builds on the success of the first one in such a way to drive the story forward, but take it in a new direction. I love it. It's one of my all-time faves. In fact, it's arguably my wife's all-time favorite movie. And we were going to have Kaye come onto the pod for us, but unfortunately, due to some technical difficulties, we had to reschedule at the last minute. So she was unable to join us. But she and I watched the movie, and she gave me some speaking points. So I'll be telling you all the reasons that I think this movie's fantastic, and I will do my very best to articulate why Kaye thinks this movie is fantastic. And Chris, when it comes to your turn, I certainly hope we're going to hear all the reasons why you think it's fantastic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you're right. We weren't able to get Kaye in here. We mentioned that she would, but we're going to bring her at the end. We're going to bring her back at the end for our trivia segment tonight. So we're going to do that. So we'll get her on for that for sure. I think there was actually a time, we were talking about Kaye, when she had said that, I don't know, there was some movie that I talked about that I didn't like, and she's like, "That's it. He and I can't be friends anymore."
Yeah,
something
she's
like that.
Unfriend. That's what she usually tells me. Every week after we record a podcast where I've recommended a movie, and I'll go upstairs. She'll go, "Oh, how was the show?" I'm like, "Oh, good." And how's Chris? "Oh, he's good." And how's his family? How's his kids? A whole bit. Yeah, it's great. Okay, what do you think of the movie? How do you like it? I'm like, "Well, he didn't like it." And she's like, "That's it. Unfriend that guy. Stop. Unfriend. I think the Full Monty was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, because she really likes that movie. But
yeah, no, I remember that, and I know that this is like her favorite movie of all time, or one of her top favorite movies of all time.
It switches. Yeah, she says it switches. It's between Star Wars, Shawshank Redemption, and Aliens. Those are, I believe, her top 3 favorite ever all-time movies. And the order will change depending on the day of the week and what mood she's in and what she's seen lately and the weather and all that. Again, as far as she's concerned, the needle is so close on all 3 of those. And I would say more often than not, if I say, "Give me your top 3 favorite movies," Aliens is the first one that she says.
And I'm sure that, I'd have to go back and take a look. I'm sure that at some point we did an episode on our favorite sequels of all time. And I think Yancey even had mentioned Aliens, that he thought Aliens. And you're right. You're not the only one. I've seen it online before. People have said that it's the greatest sequel, ever made. And I know that Kaye was really mad at me for not liking that movie, whatever it was that you said, the Full Monty or whatever. And this is her favorite movie of all time.
You go down the list.
Yeah.
You also, so I'm going to tie this back to a little something I said a few minutes ago. One of the movies you disliked a lot was Snowpiercer.
Yeah, no, I didn't like that.
Had a very creative name for it. Mm-hmm. It didn't take a lot of imagination.
Right.
The director of Snowpiercer, same director who directed Parasite, which could very well win the Best Picture Oscar this weekend.
Right.
Just FYI.
So obviously I watched Alien 1979 and absolutely loved it. Like, I just loved it so much. So of course I'm going to commit to this sequel and love this. It's the greatest sequel of all time. And actually I rented it on iTunes because I went online and it wasn't available on Netflix or anything like that. And I go to rent it on iTunes and it's got like 5 stars, and then it shows on iTunes too, the Rotten Tomatoes, and it's 99% on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm like, holy smokes, this movie is fantastic. I can't wait. So I know it's just me. I'm obviously in the minority. I'm sorry, dude. I didn't like it. I'm missing something. I'm sorry.
You suck.
I know.
Unfriend. That's it. No.
Here's the thing. Alien, when I watched Alien, I loved it. And the thing was, Alien was very minimalist, right? And that's what made it brilliant for me. But this one was different. This is like this big, splashy action movie. It was big and predictable. And the other thing is, and I know, I don't really like new movies, but I feel like this movie could just have easily been made in 2019 as 1986. It's just this big and splashy. I didn't like it. I thought it was dumb. I'm sorry. Oh.
Yeah, you're wrong. Just flat out, you're wrong. That's all.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, you can have your opinion, but sometimes your opinion's going to be wrong. How do they say that? In a democracy, people have the right to make the wrong choice. Mm-hmm. You've made the wrong choice, and we'll spend the next little while explaining why you've made the wrong choice, because I want to hear you justify this terrible take on this fantastic movie.
And I get it, because like you say, everybody loves this movie. They think it's the greatest sequel ever made. It's this, it's that. And I'm like, I know I'm in the minority. Like I said, it was like 99% on Rotten Tomatoes, all these stars it gets. I know it's just me, but I mean, okay, so usually when we do these movies, what I like to do is kind of like take a walk back through the movie and start at the beginning of the film and just break it all down and just kind of go through the movie. And maybe that'll help us to kind of, maybe figure this whole thing out. What do you think?
Okay, well, before we do that,
sure.
Let me paint it with some broad strokes. And I think this might give you a little bit of foundation. So the first one, I agree with everything you said. It's this minimalist movie. You have a small cast, enclosed space, and it's very much a thriller or almost like a horror movie in that sense. It's minimal is the best word I can think of to describe it. If you're going to do a sequel, you've got a couple of options. You can just do what almost every other sequel does. You just rehash the plot of the first movie and you just, tweak a couple of names or blow up twice as many things or whatever your movie happens to be. You lean on that. You lean into it. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, in most cases, you're like, I've sort of seen this already, but you know what? I liked it the first time. So yeah, sure. Give me another shot of that. With this one, part of the reason I liked it so much is it didn't just do that. In fact, it looked at what the original offered. It took some of the pieces that seemed to work. And then James Cameron looked at it and went, how can I run with this, but do it in a way that's not just retelling the first one? Like you're going to lean on a little bit of that first one because obviously people pay to see the sequel with certain expectations that there's going to be some familiarity. So you have Sigourney Weaver's character is still in this and is the star, and no questions about that. Even in the movie poster, it's a picture of her with a really big gun. So you're like, okay, Sigourney Weaver's going to kick ass in this one, and that's great. We love that in the first one, and we're going to love it even more in the second one. And you got to think, this came out in, what year was this one? 86?
Yes.
So, in the 80s, you don't have a lot of movies where the lead is a female character that's kicking ass, that is every bit as awesome as, say, Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone or any of those other male action heroes of the time. So like this is arguably a revolutionary kind of movie in that sense. And I think we talked a little bit about this in the review of the first one, so I won't tread on that too much. And then in order to take this in this new direction, instead of having this minimalist on a small tiny ship, the story demonstrates some scope at the beginning, that things are taking place in a different planet, on a space station, in a faraway moon. Like, it gives you a sense of scope, a sense of size. You've got this large world that's being created, and then the story takes you to a smaller, familiar setting from the first one, and you're in this colony. So yeah, you still have this enclosure, but it's not as tight as the first one. And because it's a bigger space, you have more than one alien. The first one's called Alien. You have one. In this one, Aliens, you got a whole bunch. You've got more heroes. You've got more victims. You've got more of everything. And when you start to add all that together, the movie is an action movie. It's a blow 'em up, shoot 'em up, partly because that's what was popular at the time, and partly because Cameron felt that that's something that would work with this franchise. And for me, that's part of what I love about it. It's not just you got this suspenseful movie in the first one, and it's quiet and it's slow and it's minimal. And then in the second one, we're going to give you more of that. It's like, no, I've already seen that. Show me something different. And he does. He shows you something different, but not different enough that you're completely lost. At least I don't feel I was completely lost. And you get all these new characters, some of whom are not nearly as fleshed out as the characters from the first movie, but you definitely have a new dynamic that's introduced here. So with all of that being said, Chris, take it away.
All right.
Tell us what you think.
So this is the thing. You mentioned something very interesting, and it was a good point too, that a lot of sequels are just a rehash of the first movie. And that's what you're saying this is not, the case here. I would say that it is the case here, but in a bad way. And I'll get to that. I'll point that out as we go through this, but I'd like to kind of break down the film. So the movie opens up with the shuttle from the first movie, right? So for me, I'm watching this and I'm like, it's picking up right where the other movie left off. This is so cool, right? And then there's that robot cuts open the door, with the kind of like the welding thing, right? And then they're on this space station, and Paul Reiser, by the way, he's so young, especially if you've watched him in Stranger Things, or I've also seen him in the Kaminsky Method. And he's so old now. Yeah. But anyway, so then Ripley's character, she starts like convulsing, and I'm like, oh man, it's just like John Hurt, right? And then I guess it's just a dream, right, that she's having. And she goes before this panel, and that's when you realize it's been like 57 years have passed. I guess she was hibernating the whole time. And two things in this scene stood out to me. Number one, it's 57 years later, and everyone is still smoking. In space, by the way. And number two, 57 years later, and Paul Reiser is still wearing his collar up like it's 1986.
Oh, of course. Everything in fashion is cyclical, right? Pop collars are going to be a big thing 200 years from now.
So she wakes up again, and then I'm like, is this another dream? Like, what's going on? So I'm a little bit confused at this point, but that's fine. You know, I'm in for the ride. And then she has a conversation with him, and she's like, well, you're going to go back, because he wanted her to go back there, right, to this planet where these eggs are.
Not initially, but yes, eventually. So one of the themes that's in this movie that is in the first one, but maybe not as on the nose, is the whole idea of there are corporations and there are people that run those corporations that are in it for the money. And if people have to die to make the money, that's okay. Money is good. Greed is good. And in the first one, you have towards the end of the movie, Ripley gets access to the computer and realizes that they're like, it says something like, bring the alien specimen back and the crew is expendable.
Right.
You know, and that's sort of the example of the value of this biological organism is more valuable to the company than the crew. Even if they have to pay out life insurance policies and hush money to families, that's going to be nothing compared to the dollars and cents they could make. And so that theme is picked up and amplified in this one, where the company, Paul Reiser, is like the face of the right. Man, the corporation. And you know, one of the things he says is because at the beginning they say to Ripley, like, you blew up the ship and it was worth a lot of money, and you know, someone's got to pay for this, literally and figuratively, because there's no evidence of this alien you talk about. As far as we're concerned, you're a crazy woman who blew up a ship. It's worth millions of dollars. And you know, Reiser's character says, like, after a few scenes have passed, that they're going to go back to this colony because, you know, they've lost contact and maybe there are aliens there. Maybe Ripley was right. And so there's this negotiation, if you will, where he's like, hey, I can get you cleared. I can have your she has to do like psychological treatment, right? Or
right. But she jumps in. She's like, but you're only if we go back to destroy them. Right. Like, not to study them or bring them back, but we're going to wipe them out. And he's like, you have my word. Absolutely. Yeah. And then she's like, okay, I'm in. And then I remember the thing I note that I made was on the computer. It shows a list of all the names. And then you see her name is E. Ripley. And I remember we talked about the last episode when we watched Alien, was that they all go by their last name. So I'm like, oh, we have an initial here, you know, for the first name. Yep. And then at this point, this is where we meet Bill Paxton and his character. And he basically just is channeling that obnoxious Chet older brother character from Weird Science at this point. Yep. You know, that's I guess that's all he'd done before this, right? And then this is where they're introducing the other characters. And there's the guy, remember he does that like knife trick, like over his hand. Yeah. And then he cuts himself and he bleeds the milk. So then you're like, okay, this guy's a robot like Ash from the first movie. So they're setting up all the characters, which is great, right? But at this point, my first impression is that the cast in this movie is not as good as in the first one. The first movie had a great cast, man. Great cast. And I don't know. I just thought that the cast in this movie wasn't as good.
Yeah, I'll give you that. I mean, some of the people in this cast had ended up going on to be prolific. Like Bill Paxton's a good example. Like that guy probably made 100 movies. Like he was in everything. He wasn't going to win an Oscar, don't get me wrong, but when he was in a movie, I was entertained. And you know, a lot of the other actors in, like Paul Reiser obviously had a good career. You know, Lance Hendrickson, who plays Bishop the android, he ended up being in a lot of stuff. So, you know, some of the characters, and Sigourney Weaver herself, of course. So some of the actors in this went on to do other work and that you saw in films. But yeah, I definitely think that the quality of acting in the first one was better. And I just think, in my opinion, that is reflective of the type of story they were telling and the direction they received. Like, to me, and again, I can only guess. I'm not an actor. I wasn't on set. But the James Cameron movies, you know, with the exception of maybe Titanic, he's not out to direct you to win an Oscar. He wants you to tell an entertaining story. And a lot of his stories are fast, shoot 'em up, blow 'em up, special effects, creative, whatevers. And this is more of that. It's bring in the people that can pretend they're Marines, act like they're the Space Marines. They're gonna shoot stuff and fight stuff and blow stuff up and display and portray all the different archetypes. You got the gruff leaders, like it's every day is a great day in the Corps. Like you should be thankful you're here. And then you have like the characters who are like just muscle bound. I'm here because I want to fight stuff. Is this just another bug hunt? And then you've of course got the wisecracking, Private Hudson, based on his rank, he's obviously not very senior. He's trying to make a name for himself, and it's obviously he's chosen to be the Joker of the group. So you have all the archetypes represented, and I think that's just part of the story Cameron's trying to tell. It's like we want to make it bigger, we want to make it, bring this one to 11. We want to just amp it up.
Well, I agree with
the easiest way to do that.
I do agree with you in the sense that the direction is very different in the two movies, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But one thing that I thought was cool at this point was there's that machine thing that the guy kind of like, I don't know if you could say he walks inside of it. Like he gets in and he kind of runs it, like to pick up all the heavy stuff and move it. It's like this mechanical suit of armor thing. The thing that struck me about it was like there's no CGI. It's 1986. It looks so much better. Like they use real hydraulics on it. You can see it, right? Like I thought it looked really, really good. So that I thought was really, really cool.
We were saying when we watched it, we're like, if forklifts, this is basically just a forklift. We're like,
kind of. But you ride in it, you walk in it, right?
Yeah, if they had forklifts now that looked like that and worked in that way, there would be a reality show called Forklift Wars. And they would have people in those things fighting each other, and it would be the highest rated show on TV.
That's a good point. One thing, so I did like that. One thing I thought that I did really like was then that small spaceship that they go into to go down to the planet or whatever it is. And it's like, it's camouflage. And so are their uniforms. They're in space, for crying out loud. You don't need to wear camouflage in space. It's like that stupid Space Force thing that they're doing in the US. Like the uniforms camo. Like, I don't know. That struck me as being very odd. I don't know, just a stupid point. But so anyway, so they
Chris,
get it.
If they're not in camo, how else do you know they're Army guys?
I guess you're right. Good point.
What do you want them dressed in Starfleet, Star Trek? The Reds. Hey, you got the red shirt. Watch out! You're not coming back from this mission.
You're the first one that dies. Yeah. So they take this spaceship and they go down to like this base or whatever it is. And I thought it was interesting because I see like there was a bar there. And so it obviously was it was like a colony inhabited with people, But of course, the whole no gravity thing is going on because there's like water dripping. So they find you had mentioned they're called face huggers from the last episode, right?
Yeah.
And they find them and they're in like these vials, and then one starts moving and it's alive. And then something comes up on the radar, and then it turns out it's a little girl. Right. So I thought it was interesting because Ripley says to her, these soldiers, we're here to protect you. And she's like, it won't make any difference. Yep. So you just know, like, okay, whatever's there, it's bad, But I will say, at this point, it's like, an hour into the movie. And at this point, like, I was struggling to see how this is better than the original. And I've been told over and over that, this is better than the original. It's the greatest sequel ever made. And at this point, I'm like, I just don't get it. I didn't think the characters were as good. I don't think the suspense was as good. And the pacing wasn't as crisp. And the story and the acting and the directing, it all wasn't as good for me. And I'm thinking like, okay, I'm missing out on something.
So I think the devil's in the details in this one. I think the first time you see this, there's so much going on. And there's a lot of little details you may miss that if you watch it a second time, you start to pick up on them and you're like, oh, I missed that the first time. That makes more sense. So I think the things that you need to have sort of been paying attention to up until this point is Ripley told them when she was being debriefed or she was like there was like a court, no, it wasn't a courtroom, but you know what I mean? Like she had to recount her tale in front of the bosses. She had told them, it's like, we went to this planet, we found these eggs, we got the facehugger went onto his thing, we brought it back to the ship, and then it turned into this other bigger, nastier alien, and I blew it out of the airlock and I blew up the ship. And then after the whole thing's all over, they basically say, we're not going to reinstate you. You got to go to see a psychologist once a month, and you'll be lucky to find work again. And then I think she says it to Paul Reiser's character. She's like, look, you don't believe me? just go to the planet. And he says, like, we don't have to go there. We've got people there. It's been colonized for 20 years. And she's like, well, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh, they've gone down there. They're terraformers. They put up these structures to make the air breathable. It takes a couple of decades, and then we can move people there to live there. And then, so you're like, oh, okay. What is not immediately clear, and what sort of happens off camera, and you sort of have to piece it together, is Paul Reiser, representing, quote, the company, realizes that if Ripley's telling the truth, again, back to their old motto, how can we make more money off of this? They're like, well, if there is alien technology there, possibly alien life forms on this planet, we want it, and we want to own it. So there was actually a deleted scene in the extended version where they send a family of the colonists out to the coordinates where Ripley said, like, this is where we landed. And so think of it this way. If a planet the size of Earth was uninhabited, and Ripley's spaceship landed in Australia and found aliens, and then 20 or 30 years later you send terraformers to where is New York, they're not going to just stumble upon Australia unless you specifically tell them, go there. And so that's basically what's happened, is the terraformers had been there but had been nowhere near this alien ship, so they had no problems until Paul Reiser, thinking he's creative, asked them specifically, go to these coordinates, you might find something good, and if you do, we want it. And unfortunately, by doing that, the colonists, it was a repeat of the first thing. The facehuggers sucked on them. They brought them back to the base, and that's what we find when the characters show up later. There's those 3 tubes with the facehuggers in them, and one of the guys is reading the notes, and he goes, well, this one died after successfully implanting an embryo into the human. This one, they managed to cut it off of the human, but they had to kill the human to do it. And so you realize, okay, now this is what's happened. The people have inadvertently opened Pandora's box, and now they're kind of screwed.
Well, yeah, because
these are little details which are not, they don't slap you in the face with them, but they're there. And after you've seen the movie and sort of know how it all comes together, when you watch it a second time, you really you can find those little details, and you're like, oh, okay, that was why this happened in this way and in this sequence. Because that was my thought the first time I saw it. I'm like, why did this happen all of a sudden once Ripley showed up? Like, what changed? Well, what changed is she knew the exact coordinates. Go here. That's where there's an alien ship. And so if you want to think of it that way, she's indirectly responsible for this. But if she hadn't told them that and they had terraformed the whole planet, eventually someone would have found the ship anyway. So you can let her off the hook for that.
Well, and they find those bodies there that are like in this goo, with the open egg and stuff like that. And the one person is alive, and that's where the alien bursts out of the chest. And then that's where I kind of thought, like, they're just rehashing the first movie. And then I thought it was interesting because Ripley she's the one that says, we got to get out of here. And I remember in the last episode, you said Ripley, you pointed out, Ripley gave good advice and nobody took it. And the same thing is happening here. I'm like, again, it's a bit of a rehash. For me, the first movie was a horror film, and this was a science fiction film.
Oh, for sure. Action, adventure, sci-fi, right? Yeah, to the max.
So if it's a science fiction film, though, then shouldn't it be like more? I don't know. Not to try and get all science fiction nerdy and stuff, but like shouldn't it be like more accurate, or like it should be like in the moment and like have certain rules and stuff? Like, for example, in the first movie, when they cut the alien, the acid, the blood went through all the floors. Remember? Mm-hmm. And then there's a scene where the Spanish girl shoots the alien and the acid blood like sprays out and kills a guy. But then Ripley is driving this like big tank and she runs over the alien. And so obviously you can hurt and kill these things, which is good. But when she runs over it, you see all the acid blood spray out everywhere, but it didn't go through the tank.
Yeah. Again, minor detail.
No,
so I can understand where you're coming from, but again, this is one of those scenarios where, and this is always my big pet peeve with sci-fi movies, it's supposed to be in the far future where technology is different. All you need is one line of dialogue earlier in the movie where someone's talking about what the tank is capable of doing, and have them say something like, wheels and chassis are made of blah, blah, blah,
right.
which is impervious to bullets and acid. And then when she drives over it, you're like, oh, well, we already knew it was impervious to acid. So there we go. No problem.
Exactly. I was playing the evil Kirk, and whatever.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting in the next scene because we realized that Ripley has also taken up smoking. So that was really nice. And then we're talking about the characters and stuff, and Michael Biehn is in this movie. And thank God for James Cameron, or else this guy would never work, apparently.
I agree. And Kay and I were sort of joking about that. But you know what I just saw, Chris? I'm pretty sure Michael Biehn is going to be at Fan Expo this summer signing autographs.
Oh, we'll have to go down there.
I'm pretty sure I saw his name in the lineup.
We'll have to go down there and see him, and maybe we'll mention that to him and watch him punch us. I don't know.
Yeah. No.
So Bill Paxton is another guy that's in this movie. And the thing is, like I mentioned before, he's just kind of like that obnoxious character. But he's just whiny too. You know, like, gosh, he's
I think so. Yeah, definitely he's whining. But I think part of that comes from fear. Like the idea is that these are Marines. These are the toughest of the tough. They go to the places where normal people don't go, and they shoot the bad guys. And you get the sense that aliens are not all that common. And this is a situation where things go from they think they're in control, and in the drop of a hat, they're like completely not in control. And I think that his whining is just to represent the sheer panic of someone who up until this point has been taught, don't fear anything. You're a Marine. You can do it. We're here. Nothing can defeat us. And like suddenly they go from having like 40 Marines to having like 5 Marines after one sequence. And he even says it. They're like, we're not going to survive however many days. Newsflash, we just got our butts kicked out here. I think that's the whining, as annoying as it is. I think that's supposed to remind you that the people that are still alive are having a hard time emotionally handling it, except for Ripley, who, although she's having a hard time emotionally, she seems to be the only one that's keeping it together. And again, she's the one who takes charge when things really go wrong. She offers advice that they don't all take. But the scene you were talking about where she's in the tank and the guy who's in charge there, Gorman, Lieutenant Gorman, who clearly has no field experience, has no idea what to do. And she's just like, get out of the way. She starts driving in. So it's despite the fact that Hicks or that Hudson rather is this, this whiny complainer, you do see him in a few points in the movie demonstrating some skills technologically. Like he's the guy who Jimmy's the electronic lock for them to get in the base. He's the one who they send when they lock down, they go on the computer, find the schematics. Like, so it's clear that he's more of a tech nerd than maybe a shoot 'em up. And maybe that's partly why at the beginning he's trying to seem so macho. Like maybe the rest of his unit gives him crap because they're like, you're just the nerdy guy here to do computers. And he's like, no, I can shoot guns too. And so, of course, when things go wrong, he panics.
Right. I guess, this sounds awful, but I was actually kind of glad to see him die. And another one I was glad to see go was Paul Reiser's character, obviously, because he was the bad guy, right?
Yeah.
And I love the fact that he locks him out, and you just know, oh, man, karma's going to get him, in that scene. And it
absolutely.
does,
That's exactly it.
And then there was another, I think Ripley at that point, she was like, 26 minutes. We got 26 minutes to get out of here. And I'm like, oh, is this another self-destruct thing? Is that another rehash thing? I thought it was interesting because then Ripley is like she is 100% convinced that little girl is still alive. I don't know what makes her think that, but. Well,
so they've sort of established this and sort of not. In the first movie, there was a deleted scene where, and we talked about this on our previous podcast. There are some scenes in the first movie where the alien engulfs the crew, and you were like, oh, well, that guy's dead. But you don't ever actually see the bodies for a couple of them. You just assume that it happens off camera, and your imagination is left to run wild. There's a deleted scene in the first one where Ripley actually stumbles across this area where the alien has brought the surviving crew members and sort of cocooned them up in that goo and impregnated them with more aliens. And when she finds the captain, Dallas is like, kill me. So that in this sequel, when they find the colonists, and they're like, hey, they're all alive. And the first one just wakes up and starts going, kill me. And then it cuts to Ripley and she's freaking out. It's like, she's seen this happen before. She knows what's coming next. And so she actually is more terrified than everyone else because she knows how dire the circumstance is. So when they capture Newt, she even says that. She goes, they don't just kill for the sake of killing. They need hosts so they can reproduce. Right. So for that reason, she's convinced the little girl is alive. and or at least will be for the short term. And that's what we see when she goes to rescue Newt. Newt is like gooed up on the wall, and there's an egg right in front of her, and we see it open, and the little girl starts screaming. So clearly what Ripley suspected was correct. They had every intention of keeping her alive just long enough to have one of these aliens, hug her face and destroy her body in the process.
Well, and like you mentioned, that whole sort of mucus cocoon thing, so the egg can put the face hugger on and all that whole concept. I gotta say, I liked it better when they did that in Battlestar Galactica. Remember when the Ovions were down in the basement and they put the people in the honeycombs? Special effects weren't as good, obviously, but I just liked it better. So anyway, so then they go on and they find this sort of queen bee alien that lays the eggs.
Yeah.
And then Ripley uses the flamethrower to blast them all and hard boil them all and everything. And just something you mentioned earlier, I want to go back to because we talked about the direction between Ridley Scott in the first film and James Cameron in this one. I thought Ridley Scott just is a better director. You also mentioned you're not an actor, but Ridley Scott seemed to get a better performances out of its actors.
Yeah, I agree. I think that just speaks to the different styles of the director. I mean, hey, I love both of their movies for different reasons. They're both very successful. I mean, Cameron has made more money than, well, probably any director other than Spielberg, I would think. But they're both good at what they do, but they do different things.
Yeah. And then it's getting kind of near the end of the film, and there's that whole self-destruct scene again, which is another rehash for me. I like the scene though when they're trying to get away in the elevator and they're trying to push the button and the door's not closing. And I'm like, I've been there before. Who hasn't been there? You try to push the button on an elevator, it doesn't close. And then they go up the elevator, and then the alien comes up the elevator shaft after them. But then I thought it was interesting because in the first film and up until this point in this movie, Ripley is like this, like you mentioned before, like this female hero that you had never really seen before. And even to this day, it's still not all that common. But then in that scene, then she had to get saved. The robot guy in the shuttle, he comes to her rescue, right?
And I think that was done in such a way as to try and be a callback to the betrayal. Like, she had obviously not trusted the android because in the first movie, the android turned out to be bad, right? It took orders from the corporation. It didn't care for the human life. Whereas in this movie, the android literally quotes Asimov's laws of robotics. So you're hopefully thinking, well, this is a new breed of android. This is a friendly android that will help humans and save them. And when she comes up onto the platform, the ship's gone. You're like, oh man, she was totally right. That robot's a jerk. And then, like you said, then he shows up in the ship, and he even apologizes later. He said, I didn't abandon you, but I had to take off because the platform wasn't strong enough to support the ship anymore, and I didn't want to risk everybody, and I knew I could come back for you, kind of thing.
And Cameron kind of revisited that concept again in T2, right?
Yes.
So that's interesting. And so anyway, at this point, it's like, okay, so they get in the thing, and it's like, I knew right away, I'm like, it can't be over. Because it's like a kind of a rehash of the first movie. Like, they've got to have that gotcha moment. And then there's that one big alien that follows them on the ship. And then Ripley gets into that big machine thing again that you talked about, the kind of like the forklift and the standing forklift thing. Yeah. And then I love the line, of course, "Get away from her, you bitch." Which is obviously, iconic, quote from this movie. But, they open the door, and then the little girl almost gets sucked out, and she's like sliding out, and then that half robot that's covered in milk grabs her and saves her life, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know. I thought overall, nothing really new. For me, just instead of one alien, it's just multiple aliens. But that's just what I thought. I don't know.
Well, we'll agree to disagree, and you're wrong. So,
I know. I get it.
So if you had to give it a score it out of 10, and I guess two questions. What would you give it as a score to 10, and would you rewatch it again?
Out of a score 1 to 10, I would probably give it a 6. And no, I would not watch this movie again.
Wow. All right. I'd give this 9 on a bad day, 9.5 on a good day. And I would rewatch it right now if it was on TV.
And it's so funny because the one we looked at last week, the Alien, the first one, I would give it a 9 out of 10, and I would watch it again in a second. Loved it.
I think for me, If both movies were starting now and I could only watch one or the other, I would probably go with this one.
Wow. That is, again, I am the total opposite of that.
But I don't think I'm alone in this. I think
no, you're not.
100 random people, the overwhelming majority are going to say the same thing I just said. They're going to say, I like both.
Yeah, I get it.
And I like this one better. And given the opportunity to only watch one of the two, most of them are going to pick part 2.
And it goes back to what I said at the beginning of the podcast. There's 5 stars on this movie. It's got 99%. Everybody loves it. We did an episode on greatest sequels of all time. This came up. Even Yancey loves it. I know I'm in the minority. I just didn't like it. I loved the first movie. God, it was good. God, that movie last week was so good. But on this one, I just didn't really like.
One other little thing I want to add then. So since Kaye wasn't able to share her specific thoughts, I know she and I have very similar thoughts on this. But one of the things she said to me when we were watching the movie, because we've seen this so many times, we would talk to each other a little bit while the movie was on, especially knowing that we were prepping for the podcast. And I said, we're like, what are some of the reasons that you really, really like this movie? Why does this make the top of your list? And she said when she saw it in the theater, I think, when did this come out? She would have been about 14 or 15 years old. Yeah. So she had to be accompanied by a parent, just based on the rating systems in Canada. So her father took her to see it, and he's a great guy that way. She wants to see a movie, he's going to take her to see the movie.
It's rated R, no problem. Yeah. Let's go.
And so she said, like, her dad brought her to see this movie. And here, I don't think she had seen the first one, or if she had, maybe she had seen it on video. But here was a female lead kicking ass. And she said this is the first time she really got to see herself on the screen. And I heard the same thing with a lot of people when the recent Wonder Woman movie came out. A lot of young girls were saying, this is the first time I've seen me on the screen. This is the first time. Here's a strong woman who's the lead. She's not relying on a man to rescue her. She's not relying on anybody else. She's making decisions. She is the lead, capital L lead of this movie. And I know that's one of the big things that Kaye said really resonated with her when she saw it the first time, was that she'd never seen anything like it. And it was a long time before she saw anything like it again. And she very rarely sees this anymore. None of us see this very often anymore, unfortunately. But this was sort of her first taste of this in a movie theater where, she saw herself on the screen. And that was what she said is one of the main reasons that she has fallen in love with this movie and continues to do so and continues to watch it over and over again. So I think that's an important. I
get that. I guess I get that from the first movie, but I didn't really get that so much from this one. I don't know. It's just my thing. I felt like Sigourney Weaver's character in the first movie was like total kick butt, great hero. And this one is just kind of a mismatch and just lost in the whole thing. I don't know. That's just me. Anyway, sorry, man. Didn't like it. It's just the way I am. On that note, let's have some
fun with Caveman.
So as you mentioned, we had some technical issues and we weren't able to bring Kaye on to review the whole movie with us. But I thought that, obviously we would bring her on now to be able to do some trivia. So Kaye, thanks very much for joining us.
Hi, podcast audience.
It's great to have you here, Kaye. I will
thank you so much for having me, Chris.
And obviously what I want to do is, I know that you two are very competitive, so I wanted to pit you two against each other. So that's what I decided to do. Because you're both so good at these trivia things, and you're a married couple, so we got to have some fun. Now, the thing is, you can't just blurt out the answer. If you think you know the answer, you have to say 2, which represents a sequel. Okay, so you say 2, and then I will call on you to answer. And by the way, my judgments are final, no arguing, okay?
Oh, wow.
All right, so here's the premise. I'm going to name a movie, and you have to name the sequel, okay? So if there's like a movie that has more than one sequel, I'm just looking for the movie like right after it. So if I was to say Jaws 2, you would say?
Jaws 3.
You would say 2, correct.
Say 2.
Derek, you have the floor.
Jaws 2, The Revenge.
No, it's Jaws 3D. You're wrong.
You said Jaws 2.
I said Jaws 2, and the sequel to that would be?
Oh, the sequel to... No.
Jaws 3D.
Jaws 3D.
Okay, so if you think you know the answer, say 2, and I'll call on you.
2.
And I'll keep score, and whoever wins gets because it's a sequel thing here, right? Gets a DVD of Titanic 2.
Is that Titanic 2 Electric Boogaloo?
It is. It's such a good movie. Since you guys are married, obviously, whoever wins, the other person still gets to enjoy the brilliance of Titanic 2. So everybody wins in this game. Okay, So you got it? I name the movie. You name the sequel. Go. National Lampoon's Vacation.
2.
Derek.
National Lampoon's European Vacation.
Correct. 1 for Derek, none for Kaye. Meet the Parents.
2.
Kaye.
Meet the Fockers.
Correct. Tied at 1 apiece. Mad Max.
2.
Yes, Kaye.
Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome.
I'm sorry, that's not correct.
I
Derek.
know it. 2.
Yes.
Mad Max, The Road Warrior.
The Road Warrior is correct. Next one. The Fast and the Furious.
2.
Derek.
Too Fast, Too Furious.
Derek is correct. 3 for Derek, 1 for Kaye. Okay. Night of the Living Dead. What's the sequel?
2.
Yes, Kaye.
Dawn of the Dead.
Dawn of the Dead is correct.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
I know my zombie movies.
I know you do.
American Graffiti. What's the sequel to American
Boogaloo.
You're supposed to say 2. 2.
Oh, 2.
Derek.
Break into Electric Boogaloo.
That is incorrect. Kaye, do you know the answer?
Oh, I think I know it, actually.
You're both
I don't.
incorrect. It was
It's More American Graffiti.
More American Graffiti. That's correct. You already had a chance.
Too late after I gave my joke answer.
All right. The Silence of the Lambs.
2.
Derek.
Hannibal.
Hannibal is correct. 4-2 for Derek right now. Dirty Harry. What's the sequel?
2.
Yes, Derek.
Is it Tightrope?
It is not Tightrope. Kaye, would you like to answer? The sequel to Dirty Harry is?
Well, I'll say 2. Magnum Force, whatever that thing's called.
Magnum
No.
Force from 1973 is correct. Very good. All right, 4-3 for Derek. Before Sunrise. What's the sequel?
2.
Yes, Derek.
Oh, I beat you. Before Midnight.
No, you are not correct. Kaye, would you like a
Before
shot?
Sunset.
Before Sunset is correct. You are now tied. What is the sequel to Chinatown?
2.
Yes, Derek.
The Two Jakes.
The Two Jakes is correct. 5-4. What is the sequel to The Love Bug?
2.
Yes, Derek.
Herbie Goes Bananas.
Incorrect. Kaye, would you like to take a chance?
Herbie Goes to Las Vegas.
I'm sorry, you're both incorrect. It's Herbie Rides Again from 1974. Speaking of 1974, Benji. What is the sequel to Benji?
Sorry, Benji.
Yes, Benji. What? Yes, Derek.
Is it Benji the Hunted?
It is not. Good guess, though. Kaye.
That was a real Benji movie.
It was.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. No, I have no idea.
It was 1977's For the Love of Benji. Okay.
For the love of Benji,
Benji.
I had no idea that was the answer.
All right. What's the sequel to Highlander?
2.
Yes, Kaye.
Highlander 2, The Quickening.
Very good. We have a tie game, 5-5. What is the sequel to Elizabeth? 1998's Elizabeth. What is this? Yes, Derek.
Oh. I was going to just joke and say Elizabeth 2, but it actually had a title. I can't remember what it is. Elizabeth 2. I don't remember what the rest of the title was.
It is not Elizabeth 2 Electric Boogaloo.
No, it's...
Kaye. Kaye, do you have a guess?
No, the first one had Clive Owen. Second one did?
Second one had Clive Owen.
I
don't remember.
Yeah, sorry, I can't remember.
It was 2007's Elizabeth the Golden Age.
Oh,
The last one, this is a tiebreaker. It's tied 5-5. Do we have a tiebreaker? What is the sequel to 1984's Purple Rain?
2.
Yes, Derek.
Cherry Moon.
You are incorrect. Kaye,
Oh.
you have a chance. What is the sequel to Purple Rain?
Is it Under the Cherry Moon?
It is not, unfortunately.
Is it Sign of the Times?
It's 1990's Graffiti Bridge.
Oh.
Oh.
So we have ourselves a tie.
So that's the sequel to American Graffiti.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
So we have ourselves a tie at 5-5.
Hey!
The good news is
Nerdy, baby.
Yeah.
you will win
We're tied at being better than Chris.
Yep, you will win a copy of the DVD of Titanic 2, which you will both be able to enjoy either way. So it's all good. We had a tie. Go figure. I even gave you an odd number of topics here, trying to get it, but I tried to make them as hard as I could.
Oh, there were a couple hard ones.
Yeah,
They were.
obviously.
A couple we guessed at and got right, though.
Yeah, so it was good. So I think maybe we'll come back next week with a top 5 list. Is that what we're going to do?
Sounds good. Yeah, sounds like a good plan.
And then, after that, then I have to nominate a movie. I should probably get 2 in a row, too, but I don't know. We'll do that maybe later. Kaye, so you're available on Twitter, right? At KW_Myers. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
All right. So if anybody wants to reach out to Kaye, you can find her there. You'll find Derek, of course, at Amaron_DM. And I'm on Twitter at CMcBrien, and popgoesyourworld.com is our website. You'll find all of our contact information on there. We're going to come back next week with a top 5 list. But until then, this is Chris McBrien for Derek Myers saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop
Thanks
culture
for having me.
podcast for the generations. Kaye, thanks for being here. We love having you, as always.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.